Yes, Mr. Kale, start, please.
You can start, sir. You can start. So you can start. You can start. You can start.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
No,
yes,
sir, we
little. But let's start.
Yeah, let's start.
Yeah.
Of coordinating this Zoom lecture on our Foundation Day. The first speaker is Mr. Jim Masselos. He is going to talk about enlightening Bombay. He is an honorary reader in history at the University of Sydney. Earlier, he studied for a BA Honours degree at the university and was then awarded a Cornwall scholarship funded by the Government of India to do research for a PhD at the Heras Institute in the University of Mumbai. He is author of several books and numerous research articles. The second speaker will be Dr. Arvind Kanachari, who is retired professor and head of the Department of History, University of Mumbai. He has a large number of research publications and books to his credit. He will be speaking after Mr. Masselos. So may I request Mr. Masselos to begin.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, sir, and thank you for all of you for coming to this event. I'm delighted to be here. I wish I were in Bombay rather than in Sydney at the moment, but unfortunately, we will have to live with this situation. Anyway, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for providing an opportunity to talk about one of the worthies of the association. Could we have the first image, please? No, the next one, I'm sorry. Yes. Today, this is the man I'm going to talk about. He was Sir James Mackintosh, one of the worthies of the society. And there is this rather lovely picture, a woodcut taken from the inside of his collected miscellaneous works. He almost looks like the poet Byron, and has that turn of clothing. Is there a problem?
No. I think we need to mute. We need to mute someone. Yeah, we'll do that.
Professor Masselos, can you unmute yourself, please? I have just muted everybody. Please unmute yourself.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, am I okay now? Can you hear me? Is this right?
Yes, sir.
Right, thank you. So Sir James Mackintosh, this is who I'm going to talk about for a few minutes. He lived from 1765 to 1832, and apparently died from eating a chicken bone which lodged in his throat. He had a remarkably different career, beginning with an early period of study at a Scottish university. Then he went on to do medicine at Edinburgh and obtained his diploma in 1787. The following year, he changed the course of his life again and moved to London, where he became heavily involved in all the discussions and debates and arguments and presentations of Neo-Palladian London. And he then moved into law and was called to the bar from Lincoln's Inn. In other words, he was accepted as a lawyer in 1795, and he built up a legal practice. So there is this man who's been a doctor, he's been a lawyer, he's been a commentator, and who developed a public role and as a debater, a pamphleteer, a commentator. He gave a series of lectures that all the accounts of him talk about, a series of lectures on the law of nature and nations, something which I confess I haven't read, but it apparently was an important mark in his career. He matured during the time in England, during the time of the French Revolution, and he supported the French Revolution until it reached a series of positions that he couldn't stand. He disapproved of. As the French Revolution became more and more bloodthirsty, he became less and less interested in it, and certainly was not a supporter of Napoleon. So essentially what he represented in these days was a gentleman who was the ideal, who represents ideally the type of Enlightenment advocate. He took like other Enlightenment individuals, he studied geography, political economy, the natural sciences, history and politics. The multiplicity of interests is one of the features of the Enlightenment arena in London at this time. Despite this, and despite his moderate success as a lawyer, he was unable to survive financially. He was not as comfortably off as he wanted or needed to be. And in consequence, he began looking for a posting where he could live adequately. What he then did was look to India and hoped to get a position as Advocate General in Calcutta, but he was unsuccessful, and instead the establishment on the other side of India, here in Bombay, appointed him to be a recorder of Bombay. The recorder was a position roughly equivalent to that of a High Court judge and so on. He was the head of the legal judicial establishment in Bombay. And along with his appointment as recorder went the title of Knight. So he becomes Sir James Mackintosh. His appointment covered the period from 1804 to 1811. And as he prepared to leave England for India in 1804, 1803, he was apprehensive about what he was entering into. He would miss all the scenes of civilization and literature in which he had previously indulged, or so he said. And he became more and more uncertain of his of what he would encounter in Bombay when he got there. So on the 3.5 months journey, he thought increasingly of not being adequately suited to this place. When he got to Bombay, his reactions were somewhat mixed. The Bombay itself, he characterized as being a somewhat remote and secluded settlement. But he found various parts of the islands of Bombay as being highly beautiful and picturesque. The natural attractions provided some sort of counterbalance to the Bombay summer and then Bombay monsoon, all of which were not particularly comfortable. He in fact became increasingly homesick for London and for the life of London that he was part of. Now, even before he set out, from England, he'd begun planning as to what he would do in Bombay. One of his decisions was to set up a literary society, which was called, obviously, the Literary Society of Bombay. And his aim was to get the society to follow all the precedents of life of Enlightenment scholars. The range of things that he was interested in and that the Literary Society decided to focus on was quite extraordinary. The gathering, there was a gathering regularly for people in Bombay. He'd hoped to attract the leading worthies of the city, of the township, but only got a handful. And he had his isolation reinforced. A contemporary newspaper journal, the Asiatic Annual Register, described the objectives of the association. The society had the purpose of collating useful knowledge in every branch of science and of promoting a further investigation of the history, literature, and manners of the Asiatic nations. Its objectives then were thus nothing if not ambitious, and the objectives were quite were multiple and extended. As to Mackintosh himself, he delivered an oration at the foundation meeting of the association. And he delivered what was described in one of the contemporaries as a most philosophical and eloquent discourse on the various most important subjects, which it should be the province of the society to embrace and elucidate. As he put it in a private letter just before his departure, Mackintosh realized that he would be going to India, not with much expectation. There's a quote, "I do not go to India with much expectation of approving the policy recently adopted for our ill-gotten but well-governed Asiatic empire. That empire, acquired not by any plan of ambition conceived at home, but by the accidents of fortune, the courage, the fears, the vigour, the despair, and the crimes of individual adventurers, is certainly better administered than any other in Asia." Now, this is quite a big quotation, and it's an important statement of his position as to imperial colonial rule. One, he considered that England had acquired India, or its parts of India, wrongly. The phrase he used was ill-gotten. But on the other hand, he considered that the English were well governing the Asian empire, and that this empire had been acquired not by intent and strategy, but by chance, unexpected events, despair and cry and individual adventurers. So he considered that British power in Asia had been achieved in an ill-gotten way. At its best, India was at the least well-governed, even though the way it had acquired that right was problematic. What I want to do now is talk about another part of his attitudes. The Literature Society was about the formulation of knowledge and the spread of knowledge and the interconnectedness between the sciences and learning. Science and the arts were considered aspects of the same coin. Some of the implications were spelt out in his early in his time in India around the issue of public statues. Could we have the next slide, please? Oh, no, the next, sorry, another one. Yes, thank you. If you go back to the building, the green. Yes, that's it. Thank you. Let's just leave it there. What I wanted to do is talk just a little bit about the statue that was erected for Cornwallis. And then I suspect pretty much my time will be up. Mackintosh was concerned with the arts and with the knowledge of the sciences. He was also the chairman of a public meeting which had been convened on the news of the death of Cornwallis, the Governor General of Bengal, the Governor General of India, I'm sorry. Cornwallis had died unexpectedly in Ghazipur on his return to Calcutta in 1805. And his friends in Calcutta wanted to erect, or decided to erect, a memorial in his honour. And they invited Bombay's Europeans to subscribe to the cost of a statue. A public meeting of the town's Europeans agreed to contribute, and given their deep sorrow over his death, the people in Bombay also decided to erect a statue. This excluded members of the Indian community, the leading magnates of the city, who went to the chairman of the meeting, who was Mackintosh, and asked to be included in the giving of donations to the committee. So the initial racial separation between them was eliminated. Now, the statues that were the statue to Cornwallis's memory was to be something that was quite exceptional. There were up until this time, Bombay probably had no secular statues. There were obviously statues in temples, which were those of deities. In the Christian churches and cathedral, there were plaques and but there were no public secular statues honouring people who were important, who had been important individuals in their lifetime. The decision to set up a statue in Bombay was to break the monotony of the city and its lack of outward decoration. There had been no other statues until then. Now, what did all this represent? There were a number of different agendas going on around the statue and what it represented. Apart from the initial racial division between Indian wealthy and European advocates, supporters of the statue, apart from that division, the statue over time acquired a range of other values. It was to be a sign of public regard, of the person who had died. At the least, the statue was ambivalent in its meanings. It was, in one quote, a durable tribute to a person's activities, or else it was a signal of national pride. And again, the statue as nation comes through. It was an exemplar to the younger generation and a model to them of how to behave. And it carried patriotic messages of, and I quote here, the superior blessings enjoyed under British rule. So the statue was to have a range of meanings. And these were spelt out in a correspondence that was carried on between Mackintosh and a sculptor in England, Flaxman. And Mackintosh wrote to Flaxman to ask him, to tell him what he wanted the statue of Cornwallis to do. He argued that that the statue should be a memorial of the honour in which we hold public virtue. In other words, Cornwallis was a proper advocate, but it should also be an example of the art of England in the 19th century. In 20 or 30 centuries hence, some nation would see this statue and would praise it, and as a finished production of the genius and taste of an English artist. This is Cornwallis talking again. So the statue representative was again an exemplar of what was represented. As to the physical criteria, Mackintosh listed listed what he wanted from the statue. The figure was to be natural size or larger than life, but not colossal. It was to commemorate a personality that was, and then quote, more respectable than dazzling. It was also to delineate those qualities, those virtues most useful to mankind. And Cornwallis spelt out the virtues that they should be. Prudence, moderation, integrity, pacific spirit, clemency were very remarkable qualities in Cornwallis's character, and the statue signalled what they were. So this also means that the statue was to have a moral character and embody appropriate civil virtues. It was not only about the individual that it was supposed to be honouring, but it was a symbol of the rulers and all that the rulers represented. Whatever the wider value the British donors wanted to inscribe on the statue, the city's inhabitants seem to have read it somewhat differently. And there was also a debate as to whether a statue should have its head covered. Should a statue have a canopy? If so, it might be seen as representing not a human being, which was the rationale for erecting the statue, but rather for privileging the statue as a murti, an icon of a deity, something much disapproved of by rationalist thought and Enlightenment beliefs. Mackintosh wanted the sculptor to handle the form of the canopy very seriously, and they put into into the structure that was erected. They put the statue in. And this is what's left of Cornwallis's head and hands. And it's in the Baudajilad Museum. And it goes the way of so many statues. The Enlightenment version of a Venus de Milo, perhaps. Okay, well, that's my story so far. Most of the information I've used has come from a couple of books that appeared, that were omnibus volumes that appeared after Mackintosh's death. They bring together the ranges of this extraordinary gentleman who was a philosopher, commentator, politician, organizer of men and women, and somebody who had an insatiable curiosity. He brought with him from England his library, and when he left, he was to send books back to Bombay to build up a library for the Literary Society, which Dr. Arvind will, I'm sure, tell us about. Okay, so I'll stop there. Thank you for your attention. And I hope it's what you wanted. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jim.
Yes.
Masselos, and Dr. Kale, Mr. Kale. So, sir, would you like to conduct the session? I think we have time for some questions. Hello.
Yes.
Mr. Venkatesh, you can unmute yourself and ask a question.
I'd be very happy not to have questions.
But there are a few. Mr. Venkatesh, can you unmute yourself?
Kitesh, please unmute yourself. I have asked you to unmute.
Who, me?
Hi, thanks, Madhu. Sir, thank you for a very, very fine lecture. This is Mackintosh here. Sir, the picture you had showed with the title of St. Andrews, is it the St. Thomas Cathedral which we have now? Because I saw the title is St. Andrews. The St. Andrews, as we know, is St. Andrews in Columbus, which is about a kilometer away, which is the Scottish church. Is this the St. Thomas Church which you are referring to, sir? And was it at any point of time also associated?
Have I made a mistake? It's the church that's at Horniman Circle, the cathedral.
Yep. Okay, that's the Bombay Church, which later becomes a St. Thomas Church and then the St. Thomas Cathedral. Is that right, sir?
If you say so, yes.
No, sir, I was just clarifying myself because so that was because the title said St. Andrews, so that's the reason I was just checking.
It's always been the cathedral, hasn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, it became a cathedral in 1838, is what I understand.
Okay, thank you.
I was there today morning, actually. So, and before that, the St. Thomas Church, and then before that, the Bombay Church. So I assume that's the one you're referring to.
Yes, it is the one I'm referring to. And
Thank you.
I don't know what's happened to the canopy that covered Cornwallis's statue. Perhaps you know where it's gone to. No.
Yeah. The second question is from Mr. Himanshu Agarwal. Would you unmute and ask the question yourself? Mr. Himanshu Agarwal? Or shall I read it out? He says, I want to know what happened to Cornwallis statue. Was it destroyed or moved away from Bombay?
Cornwallis's statue?
Cornwallis statue. So
Yes,
he,
it's in the grounds of the Badaji Lad Museum. It's still there, isn't it? At least, yeah.
Yes, sir. It's still there. It's still there, and it's headless and mutilated. Same picture that you showed, sir. So it's very much there.
Yes, well, that's where I took it. I took that photo.
It's there. It's there.
Good.
thank you. Anyone else would like to ask any questions? I think, thank you. Khale,
Thank
sir. Thank you, Dr. Jim Masselos, for giving us a very interesting lecture.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's now 11 o'clock.
Yes, we know that. And thank you for taking time off. I know it's very late in the day. You really took the pain to address us, and we're very happy about that.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
thank you.
Mr. Khale? I think on his behalf, can I ask the second speaker, Professor Ganachari, to start his lecture? We all know that Professor Ganachari is a great scholar and a very committed history man, and he is quite synonymous with archives and if you cannot find him anywhere, you can find him in the archives. And his recent book was quite a reach. So I just, without much ado, I request Ganachari sir to start the lecture.
Thank you. Am I audible, Dr. Usha?
Absolutely, absolutely.
At the outset, I'm very grateful for the invitation to speak on a day which is one of the most important, the 217th Foundation Day of the Bombay Literary Society that became Asiatic Society of Mumbai. First and foremost, before that, I start with this topic. I must also speak about some of my colleagues and some of my teachers who brought me to Asiatic Society. I came to Bombay as an 18-year-old boy for doing my post-graduation in 1970. I did not know anything about Bombay. And it was Dr. Kenny who used to take me to Asiatic Society and correct my notes on historical method. He was the first man who took me to Asiatic Society, and the very structure of that was awe-inspiring. And the man was equally, Dr. Kenny himself was a great scholar. Then I joined in 1973 Ismail Yusuf College. 3 persons were quite remarkable there. I was the youngest in the whole faculty, staff. One was my principal. He actually was of chemistry, but he knew more history than anybody else, including Professor Naik. And his roommate was at Oxford, Harivansh Bachchan. So he was Dr. G.V. Asolkar. And every Saturday, he would go to Asiatic Society on his own, just for the sake of interest. He was the next person to take me to Asiatic. And there were 2 of my extremely senior colleagues. One was Dr. Gulab Daune, a Sanskritist, a renowned scholar, whose name will figure in the recipient of silver medals, who taught Sanskrit in our college. And the other one was Professor G.S. Ghai. I do not know in any way he is related to Subhash Ghai or anybody, but quite possible he might be related. But Professor Ghai used to teach Persian. And both of them were extremely good scholars. And every day after finishing their lectures, they immediately would leave for Asiatic Society. So these persons were quite inspiring to me. And I certainly remember when Dr. Usha asked me to speak on this occasion, I remembered them. And before I would start with this, and I must say that ever since 1979, I became a life member there. This library has been one that has helped me the most, other than the archives and the Bombay University Fort Library, one of the best libraries in the country. Now, I would like to start with what James Mackintosh spoke on that day, on 24th of November, 1804. On the very day, he titled his address as a discourse at the opening of the Literary Society of Bombay. Somehow I feel, which is the very title is very similar to the one Sir William Jones also addressed, a discourse at the opening of the Asiatic Society of Bengal. Asiatic Society, they called it Bengal later. Asiatic, that also ASIATICK, K was dropped in 1825. And in his address, first concern that he spoke about was the people of Bombay, particularly the community that he was associated with, who was very more engaged in commerce, military, and administration, and having extremely less time for any leisurely pursuits. And he felt that they should be, spirit should be galvanized so as to bring all these people into a kind of a positivity. He also referred to Nathaniel Brassey Hallett's work on the laws of the Hindu gentry. Referred to Charles Wilskin, they say, and Gladwin's and a translation of Anna Akbari. What is most important is he paid laudatory tributes, very high tributes to Sir William Jones in his very first address on 26th of November, 1804. And he also spoke about him by saying, it was no mean distinction to be conspicuous in the age of Burke, Edmund Burke, Johnson, of David Hume and Adam Smith, of Gray and Goldsmith, of Edward Gibbon and Robertson, of Reynolds and Garrick. He put them in the same bracket, Charles William Jones. In his address, he also referred to the foundation of Fort William College at Calcutta on 4th of May, 1800. He gave a description of what kind of subjects ought to be and will be discussed and should be discussed by the members. He referred to useful arts, natural history, history of mineralogy. He talked about botany of India, of natural history, of the manners of the tropical races, the weather, the climate, the science of medicine, matters relating to political economy, regarding religious faiths, their elegant arts, their authentic histories and antiquities. I'm trying to explain, specifically talk about these is because he wanted everything to include in that. It was not just the ancient Indian history, or it was not just archaeology or anything. He wanted everything. And if one goes through the literary transactions of this, then one finds a question, is an article on storms in Bombay, earthquake in Indonesia, and manners and etiquettes of the people. you know, you find in the later days, Mandlik using Nagpanchami, you have the, you see, Ambarnath temple. First question is a article in the third literary transaction of which was published in 1820. There are 3 transactions of literary society being published, one in 19, one in 20, and one in 21. But all this brings me a number of questions. What exactly was the motive behind establishing Asiatic Society of Bengal? Remember, Asiatic Society of Bengal was established in 1784, 15th of January 1784. And it took nearly 26, more 30 years for literary society to come up. They do not take the title of Asiatic Society of Mumbai. They call it, it was called Literary Society of Bombay. It was, was there a connection between Literary Society of Bombay and the Asiatic Society of Bengal? Was it different? Now, some of the facts and what sort of composition of the members, you know, there were 17 members who were present on the very first day at Bombay. There were 30 members who were present on the very first day when William Jones addressed in 1784. Now, what was that composition? In Bombay, the 17 members, of the 2 one was James Mackintosh, Sir James Mackintosh. Of the 17, Jonathan Duncan. Now of the 17, 9 people belong to military, 3 people belong to medical services, and the rest were European civilians. It is the officials who dominated it. Now that composition also needs to be looked into, and what kind of the orientation the founding members went through, what kind of intellectual bearing they had. And why did they not accept the Indians? Neither the Asiatic Society of Bengal accepted Indians in it, nor Bengal, until the Asiatic Society that came up in 1784. They knocked down that K, S-I-T-I-C-K, they dropped in 1825. In 1832, that was changed to Asiatic Society of Bengal. Between 1784 to 1828, all were Europeans in Bengal. In Bombay, all the Europeans, you say between 1804 to 1840, and that was also by default. The first Indian members to be elected was in 1847. Now, why this kind of thing? So it needs to be seen, you know, sometimes people think that Bombay Asiatic Society was took its inspiration from Calcutta. They may have taken that inspiration, but why was it different? Bombay, the Asiatic Society of Bengal introduced Indians into their society in 1829, not Bombay. In fact, in 1833, the attempt to introduce Indians was defeated by a considerable majority in the election, because they were to be elected to membership. Whereas in 1829, Henry Horace Wilson, an Orientalist, because of him, Dwarkanath Tagore, Prasanna Kumar Tagore, on whom the later law lectures were named, Shivchandra Das, Ram Kumul Sen, and Rasmai Datta, these 5 members were elected on that in 1828. Now these questions need to be addressed. The one which I raised, what was the intellectual orientation of both the societies? And the first Indian to be elected at Bengal was in 1885, Indian elected as the president. it was Rajendra Lal Mitra. And the first Indian to be elected in Bombay was in 1893. That was K.T. Shah. Now, it must also be remembered that the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland was formed in 1823 by Henry Thomas Colebrook, one of the Orientalists who left India from Bengal, who was next only in his studies to William Jones, considered as that. He founded it. And then from 1824, from a royal charter, it was registered and it got its recognition. In 1829, John Malcolm introduced the proposal not to merge, but to get Literary Society of Bombay affiliated. It was affiliated, and affiliation was accepted, and in 1830, Royal Asiatic Society, the Literary Society of Bombay, and became a branch of it came to be called as Bombay branch of Royal Asiatic Society. I must also tell you here that when it became a Bombay branch of Royal Asiatic Society of Bengal and Bombay branch, Calcutta did not become Asiatic Society of Royal Asiatic Society. Calcutta became Royal Asiatic Society in 1936. It became Royal Asiatic Society of Asiatic Society, and they dropped Royal in 1951. So that brings me a question: why Bombay had, from 1804 to 1830, nothing about like that of Asiatic Society, and why it had its existence in Literary Society? Why was it not called? And that takes me to why was Bengal as Asiatic Society, and what was its intellectual origins, and then come to the intellectual origins of Bombay. If you take William Jones, a poet himself, a lawyer, a jurist, a linguist, studied at the University, King's College at the University of Oxford, where he had also a person to teach him Persian called Mirza, who was from Aleppo. He was called to the bar in 1774. He is being a puisne judge of the Supreme Court at Calcutta, was blocked for 4 years by Lord Thurlow, and the king intervened. King George IV, King George III intervened. On 1st of March, he gave a letter, requesting Thurlow, Lord Thurlow, who was the Lord Chancellor, to accept nomination to the Supreme Court. And he was accepted. It was accepted on 4th of March. His appointment became public. On 20th March, he was knighted, William Jones. On 8th April, he got married. 12th April, he left for India. 28th September, he came to India. And 28th of September, he took the oath as the puisne judge of the Supreme Court. Why I told you this was that this appointment was not by the East India Company as is their official. The judge's appointment was by the Crown. In fact, if you see the relation between Crown and the East India Company, it is very intimate, but entirely complex. And I'll come to that a little later. Before he came to in Bombay, Calcutta, he had already published Persian grammar. And he had his, so when he came there, the first problem that Bengal faced, because that was the first that came under British control and British administration, It was by regulating act when Warren Hastings became Governor General, first Governor General. And they ended the dual government, and they had to have their administration. And in administration, the most important aspect, that the problem that they faced was determining what was the law of the land. Both, they did not find much difficulty deciphering the Muslim law, which was prevalent. William Jones was brought because of his knowledge of Persian, and Persian was the court language. And when he came here, before that, Warren Hastings had formed a committee of called a committee of circuit, and they had engaged 11 pandits, Hindu pandits. They drafted a text called Vivada Varna Setu. This was regarding Hindu law. This was translated into Persian by Zain Ali Rashid. And this was translated by Nathaniel Halled from Persian to English. So what was Hindu law was always a big problem, because it concerned about manners and etiquettes, it concerned about inheritance, it concerned about succession, it concerned about tenancy laws. And therefore, the most important problem, I think, what I gather from all this is, why I'm telling you this is, the Asiatic society's problem was not to talk about cultural things. William Jones and say study of Sanskrit was because of his interest in poetry and in his translation of Shakuntal. But his interest in Sanskrit developed after he came to Calcutta. Appointed a person for teaching him Sanskrit. And then in William Jones, again drafted in 1789, a committee of 11 people, say Shastris. We call it Shastris in Maharashtra, but they were called Pandits. And they, to determine, prepare a digest called Hindu Digest, Law Digest. He could not complete it. Though he translated the laws of institutions of Manu, and he translated Manusmriti in 1794, this digest could not be completed because he died at the age of 48 in 1794. It was completed by Colebrook. So in 1797. Now, all this is, I'm saying, is their interest in cultural things of Indians, what was called Orientalism, as being Orientalist, was primarily, it was an administrative exigency rather than studying of Indian literature, and that came as a byproduct. Now, from this, I would like to talk about what was the case with these people. You know, I said James Mackintosh. I did say that there was a complex relations between Asiatic, the government, the Crown administration, and East India Company's administration. Every time they required charters, periodically they required charters. And then to get the charters, they had to pay money to the treasury, the East India Company. So it is complex kind of relationship. I must also talk, I said 17 members were the founding members even at Bombay. And of them, I told you about 9 were military people. Now, those people who were founding members both at Calcutta and at Bombay, whether it is civilians, civil administrators or military people, what was their orientation? What background, and why should I emphasize this, that William Jones' appointment was made by the Crown. Appointment was made by the Crown. He was only responsible to the Crown and the Parliament, not to East India Company. I emphasize this. And then they also, as they say, as Mackintosh also referred to the College of Fort William, which they called it first as Oxford of India. You know, we are in the habit of calling Oxford of India. Then we called Magna Carta, Charles Wood Dispatch as Magna Carta, and whatnot and whatnot. And then we follow everything like that. What they call it Oxford, we call it Oxford. But that was precisely for, and that's where I come from, what background these people came. And that is, Sir John Kay, a very great historian who wrote History of Sepoy Mutiny, Sepoy War, and which was further enlarged by G.B. Mallison, and it made it on Sepoy Mutiny, 2 volumes. John Kay talks about the pre-mutiny civil administration, civil service as a great monarchy of middle class. He clarified it was in the manner of early Victorian England, not the middle class of 20th century England. He makes it very clear. Now that includes this, which encompassed the landed gentry, the substantial merchants of London, and the professions. And that makes me, how were these people admitted to India? How were these people came to India? Other than both James Mackintosh and others. Right from 1784, people recruited for people came to India, whether it is military, they came in 3 categories. One was cadets. The other were writers. I once at Calcutta saw the writers' building. I just could not understand why it ought to be near, say, Fort George. And should it be called as writers' building? I learned much later about it that these came as writers, cadets, and assistant surgeons. These were the 3 categories. Now, for all these categories, they came by nomination. Their appointment was by nomination. That nomination had to be done by the court of directors. There were 24 directors as well as other side court of proprietors. Every court of director member had 6 nominations per year. And the most important requirement of any employment in India was a recommendation by a member of this board of directors. Nobody other than these recommendations came to India. They first came as writers. And the age limit for bringing these Europeans to India was minimum 15 and maximum 18. Mind you, Elphinstone came at the age of 17. Colebrook came at the age of 17 to India. John Malcolm came at the age of 15. Now you can imagine all these military people who had to come between the age of 15 and 17, maximum 18. Now, what sort of intellectual orientation do you expect from them? And they are then trained they were trained in service, given some experience, and within 5 members. Now, can you believe that at the age of 29, Bentinck was governor of Bengal, Madras, in 1804. So these people rose up, and it was among the family. It was like a family of the board of directors and the court of proprietors, and their recommendations. And so at an average, if one takes from 17, this is what I take it from Bernard Cohen, who wrote about Banaras. Between 1793 and 1812, at an average, every year came 40 writers, 240 cadets, and about 30 assistant surgeons. And these form the crux of British bureaucracy and military establishment. Patronage was used by the directors for their families, friends of the families, business associates, or in some instance, political purposes. And therefore you find Elphinstone came, Elphinstone's brother was at Mirzapur, Elphinstone's son was at, so Colebrook's son came, so every family stretches, 4 generations came. There are so many families like this that came in generations like this. Now, the fact that I want to emphasize here is that bureaucracy, the military people and the writers, they become the civil administrators, and the military people, they rose. They were also equally concerned about, their associations with the members of the board of directors gave them plum positions in India. Elphinstone got his plum positions earlier at Banaras. That's where he was with Barry Close as well as Samuel Davis. It was because of his closeness. His own, Elphinstone's father himself was a member of the board of directors. Now, so this was a sort of a kind of employment. Nobody else apart from this could come to India. Now, why I'm telling this, because these people then were to be trained. And it is to train these writers and cadets. They started the College of Fort William on 4th of May, 1800. And when I was going through the parliamentary papers, which my friend Professor Rajiv Lochan gave me from Chandigarh gave me, the e-copies of that, the Fort William paper, the very establishment papers relating to that states that it was purposely by design started on 4th of May, the first anniversary of the defeat of Tipu at Sarangapattam. That's ingrained, that's written in the text over there. Now, this continued till 1806. They realized, and then they started at Haileybury College, which had 52 years existence. So all these people who came, whether with James Mackintosh or William Jones, were military persons, having had hardly any education, were absolutely raw, and so they came up with their personal interest. They developed later personal interest. And then I would like to bring another. Why the appointment of James Mackintosh was different. In 1878, the British Crown passed an act under the title Regulations for the Better Management of the Affairs of Company. That was passed. And as one of the conditions was that a Supreme Court of duly qualified judges appointed by the Crown itself was established in the town of Calcutta, to be established in the town of Calcutta, which was to have 3 judges, and Bombay and Madras, which was to have 1 each judge, and that was what was called Recorder's Court. James Mackintosh, his appointment came from the Crown, not the East India Company's office. Neither it belonged to anything to do with East India Company's things. Mackintosh was James Mackintosh is a very different personality. My senior friend, Professor Jim, talked about him. I would like to talk about some other aspect of his. Rather than, you have already heard that Mackintosh was absorbed in French Revolution. But what is most important about James Mackintosh, when he first went to medicine, he got his degree of medicine, and then he came to law. He was called to bar, in 1795. Now, what was most important before 1795 was that he was, you see, this is the time of French Revolution. And he, the first, condemnation of the French Revolution came from Edmund Burke. Reply to it first came, and there are many replies. Most of the replies got into oblivion, except two. One was The Rights of Man of Thomas Paine. He escaped from England and wrote 2 volumes of those Rights of Man, which condemned Burke, and he attacked Burke. And the second was by James Mackintosh. And mind you, at that time, James Mackintosh in 1791, along with Burke, this is rebuttal by Thomas Paine, James Mackintosh came with a book, a book which was under the name Vindici Gallici, a defense for the French Revolution and its English admirers. In England, you expect, mind you, the conservative England, they condemned, they always accepted 1688 revolution as the best kind of change, an admirer of the French Revolution. It was some unheard of. I can understand, I tell you, Burke, when the Bastille collapsed, Burke was viewing a drama play in London, and the play got off at 7 o'clock. And so news came that Bastille collapsed. Burke went back, was going back. Everybody called off the day. The play ended there itself, and everybody was going back. Burke was talking to his horse carriage man, and horse carriage man said, good thing happened, that collapsed. Burke became so angry that he got down in that season, got down from the horse carriage and walked back home, but did not go by his carriage. And not only that, Thomas Paine's Rights of Man, 400 places, effigies of rights of Thomas Paine were burnt. Thomas Paine was tried in absentia and was hanged in absentia. Though he escaped, he went to England, France, and from there he went to also participate in American Revolution. But what I am talking about in England, the kind of opposition that it had. And at that time, a person from Whig political background talking about admiration was something, it was not the kind of rebuttal that could be compared with Thomas Paine, but he also brought a kind of, he attacked Burke. And he was moderate in his language. He was logically cohesive. James Mackintosh. Now, with this background, in 1803, he went to Paris at the Peace of Amiens, at a Peace of Amiens, and he was introduced, one of the English admirers. He was introduced to the first consul, Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, with such background, when he comes to England, do you mean to say that East India Company's officials would accept this kind of thing? No. But he became little more unwanted there. To Robert Peel, to Henry Dundas. So he was picked up he was given an option to become a judge at Trinidad. He did not accept it. Then said, I would rather prefer Advocate General at Bengal, but the company people did not accept. There was a East India Company. He Wellesley recommended his name to be the head of the Fort William College. Others refused it. It was turned down. And it is under such background, this man came with his background of admirer of French. Though before that he met Burke, he said, I have changed my opinions on because of the kind of things, excesses that took place in French Revolution under Jacobins, under the Jacobins. He said, I have, but he said, this kind of conversion, this kind of, Burke writes there, this kind of conversion of Jim Mackintosh is very, very unacceptable to any mind, English mind. But with this kind of background, he comes here. So there is, so because it was a crown appointee, the East India Company's officials could not do anything to him. His existence in Bombay from 1804 to 1821 was, he went back heartbroken. But he was a liberal. He was a liberal. He was a man who wrote, as Professor Jim talked about, laws and say lectures on the laws and nature. That was about jurisprudence. He also fought the case, a libel case, for bringing a libel against Napoleon Bonaparte, what is called Peltier case. Now, all these things I am telling you was unheard. It was very, very, people suspected him with, say, other things. It was, and then this man, when he accepted as to take the appointment, as the recorder, which was called, something like Supreme Court judge, each presidency had its, Bombay, Calcutta, and Delhi had its Supreme Court. In the very year before he started his journey, he was knighted in 1804. So he came with those kind of liberal ideas. He came with those kind of liberal ideas. And this kind of Europe, what ideas he expressed also became a liability to the other officials in Bombay. And when he wrote before departing India, I do not go to India with much expectation of approving the policy of recently adopted for our ill-gotten but well-governed Asiatic empire. That empire acquired not by any plan of ambition conceived at home, but by the accidents of fortune, the courage, the fears, the vigor, and the despair, and the crimes of individual adventurers. He sailed to Bombay, along with two other persons who came as cadets and writer. One was Claudius Rich, who married James Mackintosh's eldest daughter, Mary. And other was William Erskine, about whom I'll talk a little later. But William Erskine was he married his second daughter, Maitland James Mackintosh. Maitland Mackintosh. Now, it is in this background, he was welcomed by Jonathan Duncan. He writes about Jonathan Duncan. He says, the governor is indeed an ingenious and intelligent man, but every Englishman who resides here for a long time has, I fear, his mind either emasculated by submission or corrupted by despotic power. Mr. Duncan may represent one genus. He is a Brahminized Englishman, and Lord Wellesley is indisputably at the head of the other, the Sultanized Englishman. Now, he was received. He was taken to the governor's house at Parel. Mackintosh had not married, though he had an illegitimate child in India. Later on, he took him to England, and who made quite a good name in economic sphere. In economics, James Mackintosh gave his own house to him. And that is why this meeting, the first meeting of the Bombay Literary Society, took place at Parel House, which was governor's house. Now, so this was one important thing here is not only James Mackintosh, his own orientation, but I would like to talk about another person along with James Mackintosh, is Jonathan Duncan. Jonathan Duncan was a very, very affable person. He began his career at the age of 17 in 1772. In 1788, he was 32 years, was appointed resident at Banaras. Before that, in 1775, Banaras became a province under it was ruled by Raja of Banaras, but the resident was the one who actually ruled, and that was Jonathan Duncan. And between 1775 and 1795, he was resident at Banaras. In Banaras, he started in 1791 what is called Banaras Sanskrit College. Like later on, what was started in Calcutta Sanskrit College, and they also started in Pune. The Pune Sanskrit College. Elphinstone started in 1823. So this was Jonathan Duncan, for whom, and he also was a very liberal person. He had led a campaign in Banaras against infanticide. And taking cue from him, General Walker carried the same campaign in Kutch, which was very prevalent in Gujarat, amongst the Jadejas of Kutch. So this was the, and so and Calcutta people agreeing to his starting. So there was a little hostility between, people in Calcutta looked at him with more suspicion of his ideas. The ideas were and this was more suspicious, looked into. I also would like to quote one. When Fort William College was established in 1800, in one of the most important statements, and in quote, it is given as one of the requirements, and what was the attitude in starting Fort William College. They write, and that is why when I said that James Mackintosh came with his background of supporting French Revolution and everything, in 1800, they write like this, while starting Fort William College: it cannot be denied that during the convulsion with which the doctrines of the French Revolution have agitated the continent of Europe, erroneous principles of the same dangerous tendency had reached the minds of some individuals in the civil and military services of East India Company in India. And the state as well as political as of religious opinions had been in some degree unsettled. The progress of this mischief would at all times be aided by the defective and irregular education of the writers and cadets. An institution tending to fix and establish sound and correct principles of government in the minds at an early period of life is the best security which can be provided for the stability of British power in India. The letter of the Court of Directors under the date 25th of May 1798 has been constantly present to the Governor General's mind. It is satisfactory to know that after the fullest consideration, that many apprehensions stated in that letter appear to have been conceived with more force than is required by the actual state of any of the settlements in India. This is what they write while starting Fort William College. And against this is the attitude people in Calcutta had. And therefore, there was no question of anything like Asiatic Society of Calcutta, Bengal, to be started here, and it remained. And mind you, Bombay, it was Bombay, not Bombay Presidency. That comes in 1819. It is for 25 long years, it remains that with the title Bombay Literary Society. James Mackintosh tried to form, he had admiration for William Jones and his people. He wrote a letter in 1806 stating that a corpus should be found as to publish some of the manuscripts, Sanskrit manuscripts, is a corpus for both Asiatic Society of Bengal and Literary Society of Bombay. But it was cold-shouldered. They did not respond. And then with Jonathan Duncan and those people, so all those people who were associated were not the one who had any intellectual background, mind you. They developed it by themselves. And not only that, it is in this background, James Mackintosh was most important in this respect. He was the one who advised Colonel Wilkes to write History of Mysore. He was the one who goaded General John Malcolm, who later on became, after Elphinstone, Governor of Bombay, to write Political History of India. It was Colonel Briggs who wrote and translated Ferishta, his Ferishta. And Briggs also wrote on land system and land system, and he was Captain Briggs earlier was Khandesh, collector of Khandesh. Now all this, Dr. John Taylor, he translated Lilavati at the instance of Jim Mackintosh. Elphinstone was not a regular, a writer of, and did not have that skill. It was Elphinstone who submitted his Kabul memoirs to him, James Mackintosh, and then he kept telling Elphinstone to write. Comes the later on report on the territories conquered from Peshwa, one of the best documents that Elphinstone produced in 1819. James Mackintosh had to leave Bombay. He left disgusting. And he left very disgusting. And that's what about him later, Sir James Stephen writes. The East India Company as a company, as a corporation, and its leading servants, both civil and military, were disposed to regard sovereignty of India as their own private property, and to resent all interference with it by Parliament as an unwarrantable invasion of their rights. The policy of the Parliament was to establish in India institution by which those rights. Now he writes about, at least he says, the plight of James Mackintosh. There are two cases which are very gross of behavior, bad behavior from the Europeans, other civil and military people. There was a person who he found a person working in Bombay administration, taking hefty bribes to prevent a trial for attempted murder. And in another instance, custom master who was receiving a salary of 5,000 rupees that time a month was found taking bribes from the natives to allow clandestine exportation of grain during the famine. And the jury did not, for a long time, jury in James Mackintosh's court for a long time refused to convict the custom master. He was fined by James Mackintosh 17,000 rupees. There was a hue and cry amongst the Europeans in Bombay against him. And he left. Mind you, all these judges, just recorders judge, their appointment being of Crown. He came after the death of Sir William Sire in 1802. From 1898 till Sir Edward West, who died in 1828, except James Mackintosh, nobody went back alive. And they all had to fight against the bureaucracy because there was a conflict between King's Court judges and the bureaucracy. And he went back. He was the only one who went back alive. He was the only one who went back alive. And so here was a very liberal person, but his liberality itself his liberality itself became a matter that people had to face. He had to face. He went back in 1811. And unfortunately, 1811 May, Jonathan Duncan also died. In 1819, it became the Bombay presidency, and Elphinstone became the first governor. Elphinstone became the patron of Asiatic Society, of Bombay Literary Society. Patron, mind you. Yet he went back, Elphinstone went back in 1827. Then came his senior friend, John Malcolm. John Malcolm left in 1830. Yet it did not become Asiatic Society, it became Literary Society, remained Literary Society of India. That's the conflict. It was between Bombay establishment and over there, and in Calcutta. It was Henry Colebrook who started Royal Asiatic Society of London and of Great Britain and Ireland, and to which James Mackintosh, to which John Malcolm affiliated it, and that became Bombay branch. Now, one episode I would like to tell you, this conflict between Asiatic Society. Jim Mackintosh's son-in-law, William Erskine. William Erskine was one who knew Persian very well. He translated Babarnama. He also wrote Humayun Nama. Extremely well versed, extremely intelligent. But William Erskine worked in recorder's office, equity master at recorder's office. That was of Sir Edward West, who was King's appointee as a judge. Now there were charges against William Erskine of defalcation of funds, taking bribes. Now William Erskine was to go back to England in 1824. A program was arranged in Bombay Literary Society for his services to the society, Bombay Literary Society, his services for being a translator and a scholar of repute under the presidentship of Mount Stuart Elphinstone. He was felicited before he was to leave for England. The problem was raised by Edward West. How can the governor of Bombay honor a person who has been charged and a case is filed against him, and it is proved that he was wrong in accepting those bribes? How could he be? Elphinstone replied that I am the president of Literary Society of Bombay. And as a president of the Literary Society, a patron of Literary Society, I felt that his literary services to be honored. The fight took place between Elphinstone and Sir Edward West. Eventually, the company called back Elphinstone because Edward West was the king's judge. He died here in 1828. And company required in 1833 a charter. They did not want any problem with the crown. So they called Elphinstone back, but left and then in 1830 it becomes the Literary Society. Now here is the thing. I would like to come to another point, is what happens to the Indians who joined. I said in 1828, in Bengal, Indians joined. O.P. Kejriwal, who wrote on Asiatic Society of Bengal a book, says maybe Indians were not as educated. Mind you, Rajaram Mohan Roy was one of the best scholars of Persian at that time in Calcutta. A person who had written so much on Upanishads. He was never invited. The others were invited later. He left, others were invited. In Bombay, first Indian to become member Indian member was Manekji Karshetji. Not because he was elected to lead membership here, because he first became a member of the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and in Ireland. And by virtue of being that member, he became a member of the Asiatic Society after 1830. In 1830, John Wilson had become the member. Now, if you take the first Indians to be appointed, 1847, was Rustomji Jijibai, Jamshedji Jijiboy, and Sir Jamshedji Jijiboy. They were not scholars, but they were needed because they were patrons and they gave money. You have in 1848 Vinayak Gangadhar Shastri. I have failed to know who this character was. Bhaudaji Lad becomes member in 1852, and along with Narayan Daji. 1854, Dadabi Nauroji becomes member. And Mandlik becomes member in 1867. Remember, 1863, 61, Vinayak Jagannath Shankar Shet. No, Jagannath Shankar Shet was never a member. His son became a member. But Jagannath Shankar Shet gave huge donations to Asiatic Society. And that is why, after Vinayak became the member, it was by public subscription, people raised his statue, and which is at the foot of the staircase that Asiatic Society today has. That was raised by the people, public money. Now, importantly, in 1863, Kamruddin Taibji became a member, the eldest of the Taibji brothers. He was the first Indian solicitor to be admitted to England and to London, belonging to Sulaimani Bohra community. His brother, Badruddin Taibji, became the first barrister to be appearing in Bombay High Court. Yet, Badruddin Taibji was never made a member. Never. You have all these people. In 1865, Premchand Roychand became member and gave huge money. If one goes through the Asiatic Society yearly journals, one will find the money that he gave. Not only that he gave, but also Nakuda Muhammad Ali Roge, he gave. Now, Ramakrishna Gopal Bhandarkar becomes a member in 1865. Mind you, he has become graduate in 1862. And the last I could trace was Firozshah Mehta, who became a member in 1868. But going through all the list of what the Indians joined, and later Kashinath Trimbak Telang became his first president in 1993. No person having anything to do with Indian freedom movement became a member, was made a member. And particularly after 1850, mutiny, the racial divide became so acute. Was some of the members, Bal Shastri's articles were published in the journal, but Bal Shastri was never made a member till his death in 1846. And this continued much more. By that time, a new breed of, 1854, from 1854, the Haileybury College was stopped, and a new breed of Indian civil service, no longer in the company services. People came through these appointments, through these nominations. A new examination came, and that new breed came, which became more and more branch and what is called as the steel frame bureaucracy of the British government. And the more nationalist movement became quite stronger and stronger, the lesser people were admitted to. People talk about Telang being admitted. There are only 3 articles in Indian Journal of Asiatic Society or of Bhandarkar. From 1866, Bhandarkar was, they started collecting all the manuscripts. Government started collecting manuscripts with Bhandarkar, Bullard, then Kilohan, who were at Deccan College, and they all collected it. For a while, it was kept in Elphinstone College, then taken to Deccan College, and from there, it was taken to a place and which later came to be called as Bharandakar Oriental Research Institute in 1917. What I am stating is that hardly any Indian was associated. Hardly any Indian associated. And most importantly, if Telang was as a judge, he was associated. In 1893, you say 93, along with Telang, became the judge of the High Court was Justice Ranade. Till his death in 1901, Justice Ranade was never made a member of the Asiatic Society of Bombay. No one in remotely connected with this national movement became, whether it is, and later on, you do not find anywhere Firoz Shah Mehta. You do not find anywhere Badruddin Taibji. You do not find, now, so the whole thing, what happens is, it brings me to some observations. The European bureaucracy's hold and the patronization of the governor continued till 1948-7, till the Britishers left. It continued. Now, mind you, governor, when I said, was the chief of this Bombay presidency, not the governor of what, titular head today it is. So patronage was most important for Asiatic society during that time of governor. And the bureaucracy held its absolute class, its class, its hold all through. Don't find anywhere any Indian of anybody associated anywhere being taken into this. This is one observation. And second one is Europeans wrote many memoirs who are associated with Bombay branch of Royal Asiatic Society. In which whatsoever capacity they were associated with, they wrote number of memoirs. They wrote histories of Marathas. It was most discouraged. They say, James, you do not find who was resident at Satara. Then he came to, was Alexander Cunningham Grand Duff, who wrote History of Marathas. He went back in 1836, never was made member. I failed to gather why he did not become member. But then you have many people, they wrote History of Marathas, the Rajputana, Toad wrote those, or Mysore, or Punjab, or Pals of Bengal. But anybody writing about British rule in India, or any Indian writing, was not acceptable to them. And so there was no question of any nationalist leader. Now, neither Gokhale, and this continued, mind you. It continued throughout till 1947. You have people like N.R. Phatak writing on Lokmanya on Gokhale. Gokhale himself was a professor of repute, was a member of the Governor's Executive Council. He became member of the Curzon's Executive Council, but never could he become a member of Royal Asiatic Society of Bombay. You have historians like Anand Kakba Priolkar, extraordinary historians. You have, Vijay Kale. You have T.V. Parvate. You have Dhananjay Keer. I met one person on the coaches of Asiatic Society. I must tell you a few things about him. I have less time. I'm taking more time, I know. But was V.S. Joshi. It is he who, while talking to Durga Bhagwat, it is Durga Bhagwat who introduced me to V.S. Joshi. And I have never heard a person of 84 years, he was at that time, in 1991. I have never met a person who had such a fantastic memory. Never. He wrote prolific. He was a member, I met him in Asiatic many times. He wrote a book on Vasudev Padmanabh Phadke. So I asked him, He wrote prolific on all the revolutionaries. He said his first novel was banned in 1937. And so I asked him, I said, what made you to write this book on Vasudeva Phadke? He said, in my house, there was a photograph of a person with all this headgear of the Marathas. So I asked my mother, Mom, who is this man, this dacoit in our house? Photograph. She immediately howled at him and said, he's not a darodekor nahi hai. He's your grandfather, Vasudeva Phadke. That day I came to know that I was his daughter's son. No, such persons wrote prolific. Mind you, someday we must recognize their contribution. A person like these Vishri Joshi, we never could make members like that of K.D. Shah, C.N. Vakil. No, this is, and then that makes many other organizations come up as along with this. So Bharat Itihas Sanshodhak Mandal comes in 1910. You have the Indian historians from Pune starting Indian History Congress. Today it is dominated by Irfan and others. But it was started by Datta Vaman Poddar in 1935 in Pune. You have Datta Vaman Poddar and Professor Shafat Khan from Allahabad. So you have, what I find it here is, they did not allow any Maratha history here, the British bureaucrats. They did not allow modern period here. Nothing of any other kind of peasantry, agriculture, climatology, environment, all other kind of subjects, except they allowed was ancient India, because there was no question of anything questioning their government. And along with that came Heras Institute. In Heras, Father Heras, after all these German Jesuits were packed off and they went back, came the Spanish Jesuits. He came in 1922. He started that institute in 1926. It only came to be called as Heras Institute 5 years after his death in 1955. But then comes K.R. Kama Institute of Oriental Research. So you have so many institutions, Oriental Research, and ancient India, archaeology, anything. But what the British government, bureaucracy, and everything saw to it in Asiatic society was writing history of modern period of any kind. And I think this needs to be changed, and this needs to be looked into seriously. You have Progressive Writers Association in Bombay being started in 1937. It was started in Lucknow. It came everybody. You have persons of the kind of Mulkraj Anand writing, and Mulkraj Anand dies in Pune in 2001 at the age of 99. But you never associate these persons. Progressive, leftist writers and poets and associates, everybody. So what I mean to say that there was no intellectual leadership in Bombay, but the Asiatic society had suffered from European, the colonial bias, because it was controlled officially by the bureaucracy, by the European bureaucracy, by the British government people. I think this needs a change. Once now we are in post-independence, the very patronage of what James Mackintosh thought that it should include everything from climatology to medicine and to everything, I think that needs to be studied again. It needs Mackintosh's idea of what literary society was to be and what he envisaged needs to be again revived and brought into and shed the legacy of the colonial administrators, colonial bureaucracy that controlled this. And what it therefore must need is a connect with the people. You have so many people, you see, one of the greatest Orientalists, one of the greatest Indologists, on whom a wonderful article is written, in the series that was brought out by Natation, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and that is written by Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan. Yet you do not find his, we have still not raised even a photograph of his here in our society. We must also honor our own people. Not just because the British did not honor them. To the British, Lokmanya Tilak was the greatest foe, the greatest enemy. They had their bias against Chitpavans. As Kincaid wrote that article on Chitpavans of Chiploon. So all this had to be given up. And people must connect with, when I say connect with the natives, with the land, it cannot be only Society of Bombay. Bombay at that time was Bombay Presidency. When Elphinstone made it Presidency, he was governor of Presidency, not just of Bombay like Duncan. And therefore, it must, society now must reflect Maharashtra, its language, its indigenous folk culture, its rural literary forms. It is time to shed that elitist outlook. Bombay cannot be just Bombay only up to Wilson College. It must include the changing Bombay, should be also include. It must also include Girangaon's Bombay. It must also be brought what Bombay reflects in the poetry of Narayan Surve. It must also reflect what it reflected in what was, say, in Ambedkar's movement. That should be brought about. And modern period, most importantly in historiography, you have a person working in TIFR, going every day from Bombay to VT station to Pune, and becomes a doyen of Indian historiography from Bipin Chandra, from Romila Thapar and Asar Sharma, and everyone follow him, Damodar Dharmanand Kosambi. He, the greatest man who gave direction to historiography. That was the culture in Bombay. Somewhere we must remember it. Somewhere new ideas, new currents should come into it. And I think it's time to change, time to bring. And the time has been started. I am not saying that we have not started. One of the best things I must bring here is Granth Sanjeevani. Taking it, and I admire the office bearers, and I admire Kale Sahib and everyone, Madam Balapuria, and everyone who have worked for it. It should go not just to the Bombay people, but it should be spread into the interiors. Let them access from Bombay, and it should take place. My only last request to everyone is, if after 1951, when it became Asiatic Society of Bengal, Asiatic Society of Calcutta, it became Royal Asiatic Society of Bengal in 1936. It became in 1951 Asiatic Society. And today, many people address it. It is called only Asiatic Society, but it's Society of Calcutta. If that Calcutta Society, by an act of parliament, can be made an institution of national importance, by an act of parliament, why should not our Asiatic Society of Mumbai be also made by an act of parliament an institution of national importance? We have amongst us many Rajya Sabha. We had Dr. Mungekar, who was Rajya Sabha member. We have members like Kumar Kirketkar, who are Rajya Sabha members. There are many members. We have the entire, it's a hub of economic activity, Bombay. And yet we must find new donors. And it should be brought to the government, central government's importance, that we should make this an institution of national importance. Till I see about 1920, all activities, all war conferences and everything took place in Town Hall. Town Hall was the hub of activity. Why was it lost? There is a building which is lying down as a khandar at Kalina for Central Library. At least we must move now to shift them to that library. They spent 20 crores and it is still incomplete and lying like a thunder for a number of years. Let Central Library be moved. Let it become the center. Let it become the hub of all cultural activities today. And that as a part of the Asiatic Society. I wish at this Foundation Day, we all will work to make this society an institution of national importance. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for inviting me. And thank you listening to me very patiently. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm quite sure everyone will agree with me. It was a riveting speech. And on my part, I used to always wonder why Asiatic Society was called Bombay branch of the Asiatic Society. I understood now the early history and the transition from Literary Society to the Asiatic Society. Our president wanted to say a few words. Madam, will you unmute and say? Madam Balapuriya. I think she lost the connection again. She has some connectivity issues. Any questions? We can take 2 or 3 questions.
Sure.
Any questions? Anyone? So there is someone who has asked and any questions? You can unmute and ask. Okay, there are. Looks like people understand.
Hello.
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 Yeah.
Good evening, ma'am. This is Himanshu. Can I ask?
Yeah, please ask.
Good evening, sir. This is Himanshu. I'm your ex-student from university.
Nice talking to you.
Thank you, sir. It's really great listening to you after a long time. I wanted to thank you for that first. Second, sir, you talked about the writers and those people coming in India during that time. Even I think there were missionaries and bishops who were also coming to Calcutta also.
No, they were given licenses. They were given licenses. Even European people also came by being editors. But they had to have a residence license.
Okay.
And anything written against Navy, anything written against the governor, anything written, there are n number of instances where I think one should write a book on that. Up to 1845, those European people were transported back to England. So they also had to have a residence, something like visa. It was a residence permit.
Okay, and sir, were those people also part of the writers building?
No. Those editors they did not come as part of this cadets. It is only military and civil officials and medical assistants, assistant surgeons. They came in that 3 categories.
Okay, and sir, in the writers building, they were registered or something over there?
Oh yes, they were registered. Their nominations. In fact, McGilvey has written a full book on East India Company's recruitment and how they were recruited. And I first learned a few years back on what Bernard Cohn wrote on Banaras, and how Duncan himself was at Banaras as resident. He knew Sanskrit very well. It was Duncan who took William Jones and to Samuel Davies, who showed him the observatory from Raja Jai Singh II. So their interest and he was a very liberal person, Mackintosh, and he's a very liberal. And they came from, again, like these cadets.
Okay.
Everyone, all Bending also came as cadet. Everyone, Cornwallis came as cadet. Every one of them, everyone associated with military. You have, you in our societies, you find the names of T.V. Jervis. Thomas Village Jervis was colonel in Madras Army. His brother George Risto Jervis was in Madras Army.
Okay.
Thomas Candy was Sanskrit principal of Sanskrit College at Pune. He was major. He was, when he left army, he was Captain Candy. He was major. So they all came from, many came from military, and some of the missionaries who came as chaplains to military establishments.
Yeah. Okay.
There is
Then
a,
missionaries were fully allowed in 1833 charter.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
there is-
Professor Ganachari, can you hear me?
Yes, please, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I first want to apologize, but I couldn't come in earlier because
you know, in my enthusiasm, I mean, maybe I was under, you know, our presentation.
No.
Yes,
I
did not thank first at the beginning of my lecture. I wanted to thank Kale Sahib, you, Dr. Usha, and every one of the managing committee members who have invited me to speak on such an occasion, which I consider as a great honor.
I feel you've inspired us all over again by your very powerful appeal at the end. And the reason I was not there in the beginning was because of some connectivity issues, but I've been there all through. And it was just that I was muted and I couldn't intervene till Usha unmuted me. So I just thought I would apologize even to Mr. Kale for not being available at the beginning. But you know what networking is like and all that. But you've really given us such a survey. As a matter of fact, I'd asked a couple of questions. So very quickly, I just wondered why the Royal Asiatic Society was willing to admit an Indian, Manikji Karsidji, and not here, that he had to come in a way through the back door.
I'll just read it out. So, can you explain why the Royal Asiatic Society was ready to admit an Indian as a member and not the society in Bombay? That's the question.
The first Indian to be, attempt to introduce Indian was voted out in 1833. And this has been also noted by O.P. Agrawal, Kejriwal in his book on this. It has been also noted by other historians. Indians were in 1833. And he was, I think, there is a footnote to that. And in the book which I downloaded, I have of O.P. Kejriwal on Asiatic Society of Bengal, in which he writes that the last part, 20 pages of that book, which contains notes, were not digitized, I suppose. So perhaps I would like to see the hard copy and get whether it was Manekji Karsidji who was rejected here in 1833. And by that time, he had already started Alexandria School. He was quite a known person, very known person.
Yes, an educationist,
Educationist, and his great-great-grandson was also, Professor Mukherjee was also a person of renown. So that family was quite known.
Professor Mukherjee was, my professor. My professor. I think there are other questions. There are other
Mrs.
questions.
Mangala Sardeshwande would like to ask a question.
Yes, please.
You need to unmute, Mrs. Mangala.
Me?
No, Mangala has to unmute.
Please unmute. Please unmute. Unmute.
Please unmute.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
You know, you spoke about Indians not being taken by the Europeans at the beginning. Now, is it because the Europeans, while they enjoyed studying Indians, were a little unsettled by Indian intellectuals gazing at them or their opinion. Why did they want to have an exclusive group?
See, I do not know when they can publish articles of Balshastri Zambekar even before Bhaudaji Lad became a member in 1852. They have published his articles on inscriptions in the Royal Asiatic Society Journal. This Asiatic Society journals. They have published, but it did not make them members. But they became members after 1848 at the instance of Wilson.
Right.
It was he who insisted that they should become members.
Yeah.
So it is, there was a racial, and that becomes, particularly after the mutiny, it becomes quite strenuous relationship.
Yes.
Racial discrimination.
Yeah. I felt it might destabilize them. That's what I felt. Yeah.
And in fact, they you know, the way the Jagannath Shankar Shet was under suspicion in the mutiny.
Yes.
Charles Forget also was, you know, he carried his police on him. Even in Bombay, they were expecting 3 persons were put on the cannon at Azad Maidan, and that's why it is called Azad Maidan during mutiny. So there is after 1857, and more importantly, some of the members like this, you know, some of the members, particularly those who followed George Buist. George Buist in Bombay Times carried a venomous campaign during mutiny called Lynch the Niggers.
Yes.
You know, these are the titles of his articles.
Yes.
And people became so weary of this kind of writing that finally they took over in 1861 and they made it Times of India.
Okay.
The Indian people took over that whole paper.
Yeah.
So it remained much more particularly, and that became basically because of the bureaucracy. And the earlier bureaucracy, you know, when you talk of Elphinstone or this, they were quite supportive of Indian people. Let me be very frank. They were quite supportive of Indian. You know, Elphinstone wanted he wanted to keep panchayat system. It was Elphinstone who asked Harry Borodal to write about and translate a number of things about Mitakshari, on which later on Mandlik wrote a book on Hindu Digest. Now these things, so he was not like, he did not want to have permanent settlement of, Elphinstone did not want, because Elphinstone was a man who worked with the people. He was very favorable. You know, there was in his tent, Colebrook writes, Edward Colebrook, T. Colebrook, this H.T. Colebrook's son, writes his biography. He writes there that in Elphinstone's tent there were many books. He says, why are you having this Marathi books? He says, no, to teach the natives. And it is also our road back home. So they knew, some of these people knew Elphinstone and Malcolm, they belong to one category. But later on, as these people come from Haileybury, start becoming more and more rather than cadet and who are trained at Haileybury. And later on, a new system, it keeps changing. It becomes more sharp, division becomes more sharp. And what affinity Elphinstone and Malcolm had with people, it did not have, so the same thing did not happen with the later bureaucracy. It became strong, and that's what was called by Gary Gilmore, who writes about Curzon. He says steel frame bureaucracy, very difficult to break.
Dr. Jaswanti.
Thank you. And may I just say one thing to both Jim Masselos and Dr. Ganachari. You have taken us on this wonderful journey, and on this, our foundation day, you have made us proud of belonging to the Asiatic Society of Mumbai.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Jaswanti wants to ask a question. Can you unmute Dr. Jaswanti? Hello? Hello? Okay. In the meanwhile, I will read out a question from S. Irani.
Can I ask?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Dr. Ganachari, it was a very wonderful lecture. And I would just like to know, like you mentioned a thing that the writings which came up associated with those by the scholars associated with Asiatic, they were primarily dealing with ancient Indian history. And so what we call as communalization of history, that all has started with the Orientalist writing who portrayed ancient India as a golden age and the later part of Indian history as a dark age. So did you come across any such writings with the Asiatic?
See, there are phases of Asiatic society, phases. If you take from the early period, it is not just is ancient India at all. You have John Malcolm writing on political history of Central India. You have people writing on history of Mysore. You have writing, even on the temple of Ambarnath. Today, there are many people who have become Haushi Ityaskar, self-styled Ityaskar. They call themselves historians. But somebody must read the Asiatic Society journals and literary transactions of the Asian Literary Society. That the article on Ambarnath temple, they call it Amarnath Temple of Kalyan, Ambarnath it is, appears in 1820. But our people now are not reading all these things. They must go back. It is a good raw material for writing number of things. There were also many of these military people associated with survey writing. Wingate, Pringle, this Dickinson, all these, they were members of Asiatic who were also doing survey work. Trigonometrical survey of Konkan. In our Asiatic society, there is a cupboard called Forbes collection. And in that collection, it's a big ledger-like book. It's handwritten trigonometrical survey of Konkan by T. Jarvis. His handwritten manuscript is there. I have seen, Professor Naik has seen it. We saw that. And there are plenty of such things which those people wrote at that time. Original manuscripts are there. And I think we need to look at all these original manuscripts again. We need to do it again. And another request is, since we have started like this, as Gran Sanjeevani, there are many, of our Times of India was digitized, made into macrofilms by Times of India archives from Asiatic Society archives. But that they did not give copy. In 1991, I paid 300 rupees per day to read 1891 file in Times of India. So people are making money, but they should also be reminded that they did it from our Asiatic Society. So we must also have a section which must also bring many of this. Hindu Prakash, which is its microfilm is in Nehru National Museum and Library, but we don't have it in our society. But it was done from our Hindu Prakash, which is lying in that Talgara, in that script-like thing, and the pages are now breaking, and hardly anybody can read them. So, number of these things. You have all the you have contemporary review, national review, all the journals in which people like Morley edited those journals. They are in our society. Many people must, like in Marathi, Date Suchi became a wonderful thing, contribution. 7 volumes of Date Nivan Suchi and 3 volumes of Date Grantha Suchi in Marathi. No researcher can go ahead without seeing this first. something of this sort also should be done in kind of an anthology kind of, cataloging these things which we have in Asiatic society. That will not only to digitize them, but also to make a catalog with the subject catalog, like,
did my sister-in-law's servant give her a certificate in the office?
Sorry, I think no.
We'll ask this one tomorrow morning.
So we have so many things.
She's come back. She's come back yesterday night, evening, and I want to know that nothing has been said to me. I'll find out.
So what I was saying that there are in phases. It is in the later phase you find the liberal kind of, you have Eliot and Dawson writing history of India as told by its own historians, 8 volumes. They wrote it in Asia. They were in Asiatic society. You have Erskine, William James Mackintosh's son-in-law, who the fight that I told you about with Elphinstone and out of West. Now he wrote on Babarnama and Humayunnama. It were published by Bombay Asiatic Society, the literary society. Now these kind of works later on became more concentrated as these liberal people went away and new kind of bureaucracy type came, particularly after the mutiny. Maybe after 1840 onwards, you have Pune Sanskrit College being changed, then you have Deccan College being started. So new institutions came in by way of Deccan College. Now Deccan College had its own principal, first principal, Edwin Arnold. He was called from Oxford. So they not all came by cadets. Kilhorn or E.I. Howard, many of them they were invited to be professors in Deccan College. But these military people whom you have, whether it is Sykes or whether Edward Moore, and all these people they were trained in years of time, they were trained by some people to be historians. But to read their books, sometimes one should read it with a pinch of salt and sometimes with a handful of salt. Their translations need to be questioned again, whether it is Colebrook's or whether it is, Halle translating Hindu law of Gentoo at the age of 37. Can you believe 37 you can master changing Sanskrit Hindu law into English, which our Mahamahopatya took whole life he spent for it. Pavakane, Mahamahopatya Bharataratna. So their works, one needs to also see whether they were, in the words of Edward Said, whether they were producing something for consumption of Europe. Some of them, they did that. Henry Maine, who was at Calcutta and late was visiting, wrote village communities, East and West, comparing it with East and West and show how West was good. So here is different types of, there cannot be put, all people cannot, Europeans cannot be put in one basket and say that they are bad like this. No, there were quite a number of people who did good work. There were some with different things. James Mill also, his son started, John Stuart Mill, most famous fellow who wrote the Defense of East India Company in 57, was also a writer in East India Company's office in London. So here is a person who writes on India without coming to India, and that becomes a text right up to 1916. In 1845, Bhaskar Tarkarkar called it as the greatest disservice that they dwarfed Indian people, Indian mind. Bhaskar, the people criticize.
Professor Ganachari, we are running out of time.
Sure. Yeah. Again, I take one more minute and to thank you all for giving me this opportunity. I consider it a great honor to me to be speaking to you all.
I would like to inform with great pride that Granth Sanjeevani has membership from all over India and also all over the world. We are really happy about that, and we want more memberships. So it is time to thank everyone who are involved in this lecture and then who actually organize this lecture and the speakers and the chair. So I take this opportunity to thank our chair, Mr. Sharat Chandra Kale, former president of the Asiatic, for readily agreeing to our request and for conducting today's session effectively.
I also would like to interrupt you for a second. I
Yes.
also would like to thank Professor Jim. I was delighted to hear him too, Professor Jim, and
Yeah.
we are delighted to hear him.
I second you. I thank Dr. Jim Masselos for his interesting talk on enlightening Bombay. We really, it's very new for us. I thank Professor Arvind Kanachari for explaining in detail the transition from literary society to the Asiatic society and for reminding us the early history of the society. I thank the audience for being present and asking questions and keeping the session lively. There are many, notes of gratitude and which I will send it to you later.
Sure.
And I thank my colleagues Shehnaz and Madhu Kelkar for helping me in organizing this program. We at the Asiatic organize many programs, the details of which we keep sharing. I request you all to join other programs too.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Stay safe. Good night.
Yes.
Good night. Good night. Thank you.